Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, both new and old. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss something that's really important and a game changer for life as we know it and life as we want it. So we're going to talk about gender equality and how we engage men a lot more in that discussion. And just looking around this room, I'm really pleased to see that about 20% here are men. Seems typical. But it's the good men, because women deliver and a lot more than babies, and there's a lot of good men who deliver for girls and women. So my name is Katja Iversen. I'm your moderator, instigator, troublemaker, and time police. I'm also, yes, as Brittany said, the president CEO of Women Deliver. We're an advocacy organization. We drive investment in gender equality and girls' and women's health and rights, and it's both political, financial, and social investment. So it's such a pleasure to be at the Skoll Forum. We know in Women Deliver, and we can actually also prove, that when you invest in girls and women, when you invest in gender equality, there is a ripple effect and everybody wins. It's the entire families, it's communities, and it's nation. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not a win-lose. It is a win-win-win. So, but to get gender equality, get a more gender equal world, it's not a woman's issue, it's a societal issue, and men and boys play a key role, and they win as well. So, as most of you know, this conversation is not happening in a vacuum. From the streets to the boardrooms to the halls of power in Parliament, gender equality is really moving, and there were some big wins the last couple of years, depending what eye you see it with. But yes, time's up, and we have the discussions in Davos at the G7, in the streets, under the trees in the villages right now. So, but we also have a situation that despite really clear progress, we're just not there. There's not a single country in the world that has gender equality. We still see tremendous pay gaps. We still see women underrepresented in almost all aspects of power, whether it's the boardroom, the parliament, governments, industries, films, media. And also, in most countries, girls still face some tremendous barriers for continued education, not to mention, in public spaces and some of the big sexual harassment discussions, and having the ability to decide on her own body and fertility. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. But we're not here today to discuss the problems, because we know them. We're here to discuss what can we do about them. So we are focusing on what needs to be done and how to do it. And we know that challenging men, but also helping men challenge themselves and each other, is part of that solution. We know that men have a big personal stake in it, in bringing much of the needed change for girls and women. Not just because it's the moral imperative, not just because they have women in their lives that they care for, but also because men's commitment will win for them. We all suffer under stereotypes. We all suffer under, not being able to live the full lives we live because we're put in boxes that are kind of preconceived by society. So, but how can we do that, and how can boys and men help that fight? This is what we're discussing. So, I have a tremendous panel here. But one of the things that this is so special is that this is not just about what happens in the workplace or in the formal rooms of power. This is also very personal. It's very professional, and it's a personal and a professional undertaking. So my first question to this amazing panel, where you have Gary, and I just want to say, on the app you have all the bios, so I'm not going to go into, kind of a long on that, but really, Gary from Promundo, and also heading the Men Care Alliance, and an eternal source of inspiration, both in research and in what you say and do. And Judith, who is one of the best brains I know in research, and have done tremendous to really shine a light on this. Dakshitha, who lives it every day as a strong feminist from Sri Lanka, who will also share some of the personal gains and costs from that. And Elizabeth, senior advisor from UN Women, and the brain behind the he for she and the hands behind it, and really rocking it. So yeah, you can see a lot more about them. But let me ask you, just a quick fire round. Why do you care, Gary?
I grew up in a place called the Republic of Texas. No shortage of some amazing stuff there, but no shortage of some of the worst examples of men's behavior and of manhood, including witnessing a shooting of a young man getting his stepfather's gun and using it against another young man, to several young men in my dorm in university a couple of years later getting a girl drunk, having sex with her in the dorm, doing sort of nothing about it. So those versions of manhood contrasting. My father's a social worker. He's worked in children's rights his whole profession, and so to me, there was no reason that manhood couldn't be about caring. And I had the opportunity to do a study on children victims of sexual exploitation in Brazil a few years later. Met some amazing feminists in Brazil who said, "What are men doing in this equation? Why aren't you doing more?" And that was an instigation to create Promundo with some allies.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
So I grew up in a small village in Zimbabwe where I saw an interesting dynamic where women did all the work and yet men made all the important decisions. And that led me to a conclusion that if we want to actually achieve gender equality, we've got to involve everyone and really try and focus on the idea that what we share is much more powerful than what divides us, that gender inequality should not be a polarizing thing. It's not men versus women, it's all of us working together. So really my own experience and understanding where the power relations come from within this space led to the creation of he for she.
Thank you for sharing that. Taki?
So I grew up in a suburb in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and growing up I saw how my parents, neighbors, relatives, teachers treated me in a different way, or treated my fellow other men, other boys in the class or the boys in the family in a different way than the sisters and the other female friends. I thought my parents or teachers were super, like they are super affectionate of me, or they love me a bit special. But then I realized, no, this is a systematic issue. So I am not able to, then I realized that I'm not able to change those decisions which were made in the past, but I can do a difference in the future. So I strongly identify myself as a feminist, and I work with my organization to make sure that we actually get rid of these systematic barriers and engage men in terms of understanding that they have the privilege and how they can let go of that privilege.
Thanks. Judith?
I think for all of us it begins young. I think the most formative for me was listening to my parents, who were both highly capable, argue about resources in the family, and my mother, who was graduated from college at like 19 and so forth, doing the management but still not having decision making. She then had I'm one of three, but she had a fourth child where she almost died in childbirth. She lost 7/10 of her blood. My youngest brother died, and I found my father sort of at the back of the kitchen, crying quietly, but unable to acknowledge the loss. And a year later, my mother was pregnant again, and she came to me, and she said she wanted my help in ending the pregnancy. But she did not go to my father. That focused my mind.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I'm here because of my grandmother. She was the smart one in the family, but she never got an education because that went to her brother. And the same she went and supported my grandfather to get an education, and then it was her turn, but then it wasn't appropriate for a woman to work. So she stayed at home until the day he retired. And he was a good man. He was a really good man. But it was just the dynamics. But I know that those dynamics can be broken, and that's why we're here, to see how we do that. So thanks for sharing that. I think we all have our stories, and I think as whatever we do, whether we're investors or activists or innovators, that power and of fire from why we are here, we may never forget. So, Gary, let's jump a little deeper on the why. You are one of those beautiful leading voices in this whole work. And you spearhead the State of the World's Fathers that is coming out in 48 days? At the Women Deliver Conference. Yes, and you also advise the big players, the UN, the World Bank, governments, on what to do. So, in your opinion, why is male engagement a must to achieve gender equality, but also why is it a must for men?
So at the risk of a little mansplaining, look at the men around the room and say, 202 years is the time that the World Economic Forum estimates that it will take for us to get equality for women in the workplace. It's a ridiculous number to think of where we are. And choose other numbers, the pay gap, choose women doing 3.3 times the amount of daily care work, choose 30% of women in the world experiencing violence, that we often kind of hide behind a phrase of violence against women instead of saying it's men's violence against women that we're talking about. Choose any of those issues to say this is also on us men. This is about our action or inaction. This is power and privilege that we may not want to have conversations about. That's the uncomfortable part. So that is the part that if I, share this with a lot of men, I don't get invited to come to the bar later on in the evening. But I think we need to say that one. The part that I also think we need to bring in there is to say, not only is it the moral imperative, as you called it, Katja, to say it's pretty obvious that is what we as a people and a species believe needs to happen in terms of equality, but to say we as men have a stake in this. And particularly that we've got a stake to kind of break out of whatever you want to call it, toxic masculinity or harmful ideas about manhood, that take our lives. And so the statistics of what shape too many men's lives are also the same root of what has caused harm forever in women's lives. We're 2/3 of the suicides in the world as men. We die 4 years on average earlier than women by what we could call driving under the influence of manhood. That's not a biological issue. That is how we are socialized as men. We launched a study today together with Unilever on the cost of the man box, we called it, where we worked with a health economist and survey data we had from the US, UK, and Mexico. And we put a cost to what the man box, these rigid views, mean in men's lives. $16 billion is the price tag every year in the US just for 18 to 30-year-olds of 6 health outcomes that we have data for. Bullying, depression, suicide, gender-based violence, traffic accidents, binge drinking. For the UK, that number came to about $4 billion US dollars. For those who are British, that is about twice what the UK spends on tea every year. That would resolve your NHS deficit of driving while under the influence of manhood, essentially. So I think part of what we also have to say is we as men have a stake in being better human beings. We've got other survey data from around the world that men who buy into gender equality are happier and healthier. So clearly there's a lot to talk about power and privilege, and we can't step away from that, but I think it's also important to say we as men have a stake in this, and we get to be better, full-hearted human beings when we embrace this, even as we're going to have some hard negotiations to do to say we also have to acknowledge there's a finite number of resources and seats at different tables. So that's the hard part, but I think we don't do enough with men to say there's really a brighter shining light that comes here when we become kind of fully invested in gender equality. Are you convinced?
You. Absolutely. Kind of driving under the influence of manhood.
It's dangerous.
I'm a communication person. I just there was so many tweetables there. And by the way, the hashtag is SkollWF. So, Elizabeth,
yes.
You're the advisor to the head of UN Women.
Indeed.
Or special advisor. And you came up with the He for She campaign, and you run it. And I know there's people who've been thinking, why is UN Women running a campaign for men?
Yes.
And why do you spend money on that? And so there is this debate, do we, because there's enough of a problem to start with, do we want to spend resources on both involving men and fixing men's problems? Said a little cheekily.
No, I mean, this is really important, a conversation, because I hear this all the time. But let me actually quickly give some framing in terms of the foundation of He for She. Yes, I co-created He for She, But it really also came about as an idea from my own executive director, the head of UN Women, who is this visionary leader who was at the forefront of the anti-apartheid movement, who understood during that moment that it took everyone in South Africa to end apartheid. It wasn't just about the black South Africans ending apartheid. And she felt very strongly that unless we engage men into this conversation, it's going to take us a very, very long time, as Gary highlighted. And so we need to bring everybody to the table. And there is this sort of misperception that UN Women should only be focusing on women and girls. And I would actually like to argue and say, yes, that's important, but at the same time, we actually need to fix systems that are built by men for men. This idea that we've got to fix women, women should lean in more, women should break the glass ceiling. I mean, isn't it great if a man removes the glass ceiling because you put it there? But the only way, right? So we don't have to cut our hands moving the glass ceiling. But I think the important thing here, I think, is to highlight that it's going to require all of us working together. And UN Women cannot end gender inequality simply by engaging women. It should not be a woman that says, don't beat me up. And men should know not to beat a woman up. But the only way that the men can know how to do that is if we engage them in a conversation. So we are not taking money away from women to girls, from women and focusing on men. And also the he for she, one important thing, the men come with their own money. He for she is completely funded by the champions that engage with this movement, in addition to also engaging them in bringing money for the work of UN Women.
Good, thank you. Thank you. Now, you have to be a little cheeky and funny, eh?
No, that's good. That's good.
So Daki, you're a really accomplished, and not only young advocate, but advocate, and not just a leader of tomorrow, but really leading today and being a role model in your community and also now in the world at large. You're a good guy. You're one of them.
Call us up.
Yay! But just tell a little bit about that journey and also what that has cost you and gained.
Yeah. So when I first started working with the Youth Advocacy Network Sri Lanka, which is a youth-led organization, a group of young people who used to be trainers working on gender equality and SRHR, most of us sort of realized that it's important for us to work on gender equality as young men because we sort of felt that we have that privilege and the power to help women and help girls. It's sort of this protectionist man savior kind of attitude, and it took us some time, a lot of conversation and discussion for us to realize that that's not the approach we need to take. It's more towards, this space actually belongs to women. That's something I strongly believe in. Gender equality, we need to talk about equality because there's inequalities, and inequalities are faced because men are in power. And then the whole idea of talking about gender equality needs to happen in a space which is comfortable and convenient for women, not just us letting go of our power or asking women to be a part of the solution. So it was very challenging at the beginning because for once, many friends of mine, family, and the colleagues were thinking that, okay, so this young man is talking about gender equality. It's sort of a harmful thing for his manhood. He's becoming less of a man because he's talking about gender equality. He's identifying himself as a feminist. And on the other hand, the challenge was that I, as a young advocate, working on gender equality, it was difficult for me to also realize the sort of how to get involved in the space, because that space belonged to women, and if more men come into that space and start doing advocacy, again, that's not a good dynamic to have. So that's very tricky at the beginning, but I hope that, as the Youth Advocacy Network Sri Lanka and as individual, as a person, we have been able to sort of tackle this space and push for better policies in Sri Lanka, and also do a lot of community engagement work with faith-based leaders, with the deaf community in Sri Lanka, and also healthcare providers who have that, who still has that power in terms of decision making, in terms of women's access to healthcare, information in schools, and at the families in terms of letting young women go out from the houses when they reach puberty, or letting young women decide what they want to pursue for their education, rather than getting them married. the biggest percentage of young women in universities are following medical degrees, right, in Sri Lanka. But when you actually look at the numbers, most of the doctors are men. So, you realize that somewhere in the process, those educated women have just been, asked to look after their kids or, do household chores. Mm-hmm. So that's something we need to change.
I see enormous change coming in younger generations, but it just doesn't happen automatically. We can't wait for the young people to come and fix it. So it still needs the former youth to engage. But it's been very encouraging to see what happens when young men stand up against the elders and say, "We don't want child marriage. That was your time. It's not our time." Judith, your programs, your research is redefining communities and really lifting up what's happening across the globe in communities for girls. And it's redefining how the world thinks. No pressure. So you look a lot at the power dynamics between men and women, but also girls. So both at the individual, but also the structural level. Well, you take it into account. So just talk a little bit about your findings and how that plays into it.
There are lots of threads here, and the big boundary keeper for me is economic power. So, human rights is not an allocation tool. Everybody has them. So what do you use? So who's my constituency especially are those of the youngest ages at risk of the worst outcomes, and those places where they're concentrated. That'll lead you very quickly to girls and some boys, but there is a core constituency. The vast majority of women in the world will be sole or substantial supports of their families, rising to 92% in Liberia. They'll be single parents. Money in female hands is worth 10 to 20 times that in male hands. Now there are studies of as the fertility falls, because the issue really isn't fertility but dependency burden. Female pensions are spent differently than male pensions. Grandmothers are still in their pitching. So not to invest in the poorest girls and poorest communities is planned poverty. And the boundary keeper is sexual violence, reputational risk, other kinds of gross harassments, and preemptive lack of female space. Girls do not have 5 friends and a place to meet them. Boys do. We may not like what happens there, but they have that. Fish don't talk about water. So my particular focus is to say everything I've heard makes sense to me. Where I think the energy should be prioritized is, first of all, we have the concentrations of the poorest girls, which have many other things. I mean, these are all places without electricity and financial inclusion. You can find those hotspots, and in those places, find the segments of excluded females, which often are as high as 68% of the females between, let's say, 6 and 20, either on the basis of schooling, on the basis of documentable, measurable, either child marriage, which isn't marriage, sexual abuse, and so forth, and invest in them and use them as the anchoring population. And from there, move to identification of which gatekeepers and potential allies, but it's per segment. So the girls 8 to 15 in Ethiopia living apart from parents and not in school, domestic service, which is a pathway, it's a form of trafficking, will identify their employers. The girls in Upper Egypt will identify their brothers as interfering and move from sort of the vertical axis when you're planning from those segments outwards. Doesn't mean there's no role, but it needs to be very specified and prioritized. And the cost issues come in because the populations you're trying to engage, males, have a higher opportunity cost than females. So be very careful that you cap budgets, or at least keep track of the value for money and holding these young females central.
So specified in communities, support the girls, look at that, both barriers but also enablers in the communities, and invest in the allies and minimize the gatekeepers.
I mean, you can be entirely evidence-based to the right places, which I really focus on, because everyone has a story, I'm sure, many stories. But there are places where there are places where the majority of girls agree with all 5 reasons in the Demographic and Health Service survey that say, under what circumstances should a girl be beaten? And they're basically, well, if she burns for food, well, if she goes out, you have places where you can find not only all the other things that are hideous, but you find a population, basically Stockholm Syndrome, a group of females who have totally accepted that this is the boundary around them. That means that their labor, their fertility, and their sexuality is totally controlled.
Okay, great, thanks. Whoa. Well, we're not going to get bored. There's enough to do. So let's take that into the solutions. You already touched upon it, kind of the getting in there. So let's change it both from the why, but also to that how. How do we engage boys and men to drive progress that really counts for everyone? And Gary, we spoke about it. We are living in a very, very powerful moment and movement. I don't think, I've never seen anything like it as what's happened the last couple of years in some parts of the world, and maybe not everywhere. Not, kind of it might not be moving so fast in the communities of the poorest. But how do we now move from beyond calling men out to actually calling them in?
Yeah. I think one is, and I can touch on some of Judith's examples, even in some of the most challenging settings in the world where there's not a lot of men on our side, there's always at least a few. Right. And part of our work has been trying to find who those men are and how can we use them as pathways to engage other men in the same settings who may also believe in more gender equitable approaches but aren't speaking out. And I think it's also looking at, for every one of the problems that you listed, we can get men to spend more money in the household if we change the norms around them. We can do it with parent training. That's one of the ways that we're engaging governments in Rwanda, Chile, Brazil, Lebanon, to say we can see evidence of reductions in violence. We can see fathers supporting their daughters in equal ways as their sons getting into education, and see the spill-on effects and the knock-on effects of that. Obviously, doing that with 20 at a time is not nearly enough, but we can find ways that we can scale those approaches up. And I think we've got to look at this amazing moment that Me Too offers us, which is a lot of men saying, and a lot of, I think a lot of women sort of exacerbated that men are saying, oh, it's gone too far. And what we've tried to do is use really pointed data to say it's not gone nearly far enough. We've done household surveys recently in the US, UK, Australia, Jamaica, Mexico, looking at how many young men in the last month carried out some form of harassment. It comes at about 1 in 3 in the last month, either online or in a physical space. And to say, you want to call out a few men at the top is a great thing to do, but we've got a lot of calling out every single day. So what we're trying to do is to use bystander approaches. We also find that about 80% of young men want to speak out when they see other young men cause harm, but they're afraid to because they're afraid the violence will come back at them. So it's also flipping this around and saying, if there's a majority of us who believe that this is wrong and causes harm, let's stand up and make noise about it. So figuring out how we do empower bystander approaches, which also have some reasonable data behind them if done well. This is not having young men become designated bouncers who beat up the other guy because they saw harassing. It is about how we diffuse it with nonviolent approaches, but we call out and we stigmatize the behavior. It's also figuring out how do we take this into the places where young men already hang out. So if that's sports programming or after school programming or job training programming, not using the resources we need to continue to empower young women, but finding those spaces that somebody's already put resources toward to bring young men together, adult men together. It's workplace-based training where we know a lot of this happens as well. And then it's trying to figure out ways that we take it to scale and evaluate it, make sure that we can see that it works. And I think Elizabeth's point of saying, there's not enough funding to go around. We do have to hold ourselves to high standards, but these approaches can work. And a lot of it is showing if we create a world around men, so it's not just 1 or 2 men at a time, but how do we change the social norms around that say from early childhood onward, this is what we expect of you as men. This is what we expect boyhood and manhood is about, not letting boys continue to get away with harmful behavior and even being incentivized to do it. So I suppose, I think it is to look at the size of those problems, but to acknowledge for every young man who uses violence, there's 2 who feels fearful about the violence they've seen and pain of violence they may have seen carried out against their mother. And how do we tap into that piece of the story that I think we forget about?
Mm-hmm. So I don't think we can make a direct parallel, but, I lived in Italy at some point, and I lived there when they put they said now everybody has to wear helmets, and they said nobody will do that in Italy because they ruin their hair. But they did, and one of the ways they did it was actually with data on lives saved, but also on cost saved. Yeah. And we can't make a total parallel, but it became peer pressure. Take on your helmet. You know, this is what we do. Yeah. So we can't kind of take it directly, but norms can change, and we gotta go for it deliberately and early.
Yeah.
Judith. We know that some of the biggest barriers are systemic. Can you just talk to that? You know, what systemic change? You touched upon it, but what systemic change do we need to see, both seismic, but also, you know, in communities, to really see a more gender equal world? And what is that role of men? I know you focus a lot on the girls in your research, but what do you see of the role of men in doing that?
I think the best policies are ones which are transparent and, though available with both men and women, will be much more powerful for women, simply because of the position they're in. So the first thing is to have analytically oriented men who think structurally on our side, making structural as well as personal. Personal is fine, but structural arguments. Because even when you begin to soften the conversation, the follow-through will not be there. I'm a very hardline economic determinist, right? Divorce laws change. Who gets divorces? That will be women, right? Child support laws change. What happens? So going chronologically, universal birth registration with unique IDs and establishment of child savings accounts for both boys and girls. Big game changer for girls. Should happen at least by age 10. In most cases, you can have a savings account. That basically establishes a fiscal identity. It also is a portal through which you can do financial manipulations that would be very powerful and useful. Prioritizing savings behavior, especially in boys. Girls are savers. But I just saw a study in Kenya of how IT was being used, and the rural females were saving, the urban men were borrowing, and a third of the young men were gambling. No, I'm serious. So, and these things carry specific transaction costs. They're in a non-transparent, go-go frame, but they're extremely consequential. So teaching boys to be not just carers but savers. My own grandson, who was 7, regularly comes home with more money in his pocket than his age. We always trying to find out why. And no, but it's this behavior, the economic, financial responsibility for males and financial access for females, I think, are absolutely vital. And I would, as early as possible in school, portal savings accounts, programs at puberty. For girls, we have a program that we supported, kind of fostered in Rwanda. It's called the 12-year-old check-in. I would now call the 10-year-old check-in. But the point is that because girls have no social capital space, and it's grossly eroded, and governments can do this, a campaign in which a year, all girls were in a girls' club, and you could do the same for boys. They'll likely you do it at a later age, but I'll leave that to others. But basically, like a social vaccine, right? Inheritance systems, and lastly, schooling systems. Schooling systems are benchmarked to male lives. Breaking at age 12 is like the worst place you break for a girl. So if you're going to add a grade, add it just for girls. Have the boys go to the next village. If you've got double sessions, have a girls' session and a boys' session. But there are a lot of shapes. So what I say we can do there is we create a social space for females that males advocate for as well. And I think they need their own spaces with healthy stuff in them as well. There are parallel, interventions here for males.
Thank you. This is one of the times when I wish we had a lot more time. But we'll open for questions if you want to drill a little further down. Daki, you have a very special vantage point, because you are in the communities, you're out there, but you're also moving globally. So, you have that finger on the pulse, both what happens normative globally, but also what happens in your own community and families. So you see it play out every day. In your work, how has the male engagement in community and the leaders, how do you work with them as allies in really making things change?
So from my experience with the Youth Advocacy Network Sri Lanka, we've realized that the starting point to talk about gender equality is actually within the families and schools at a very young age. This is a conversation which needs to happen when children are quite young, and then you can actually start building on it. Particularly within the school phase, within the families, you get parents, teachers, and students involved to talk about it. Like one proven approach which has given better outcomes is sexuality education, for an example. If you do it properly, in a comprehensive way, it opens up a space for people, actually young people, to talk about their own sexuality, learn more about their bodies, more about their rights, but also respect each other, develop the sense of equality among each other, and then realize that different types of issues faced by young girls and women because of the sexuality, because of different laws and regulations and social norms and attitudes towards the young women's bodily rights. So that is somewhere sort of a moment we have captured in our work, where we go to schools, we go to communities, engage with teachers, most of the time who are men, engage with community leaders, again most of the time who are men, to open up this space and to talk about sexuality education and bring different kind of stakeholders in it. And the other one is actually to work with faith-based leaders, which has also given us some results within the Sri Lankan context. Most of the faith-based leaders are men, and there's a certain sense of belief and trust towards faith organizations and faith-based leaders. So, engaging Buddhist monk, engaging Catholic priests, engaging Hindu and other monks, it has also given us shown results in terms of how different communities would go to their religious space, but then engage in a conversation in a safe manner to talk about equality and respect and understanding the power dynamics.
Great. They really work with the one who influence. When the women deliver, we often say it's the parent, it's the preacher, and it's the teacher. And many of them are men. Yes. Elizabeth, institutions have a lot of power, structures, yes. Individuals. You can kind of look at power from those different perspectives. And you sit in the middle of a big institution that are here to really change the world for girls and women, but really achieve this gender equal world. What have you seen work on male engagement? Let's put he for she aside, yes. But look at some of the other initiatives that you have seen work. But also, what are the main lessons? Because as we said, we want people to think and we want people to feel. But most of all, this is a really powerful audience. We all want you to do. So what's the lesson learned that people can also take home?
Yes, if you indulge me, I would talk a little bit about he for she, because some of the work that's really worked well is around the he for she, beyond the social movement. So as a quick background, we launched he for she in 2014 with a simple call to action. We wanted men and boys to go to heforshe.org and make a commitment, not a pledge, but a commitment. And there's an important distinction here, which is that we recognize that gender requires a commitment. You can't just say today you said I'm he for she and therefore the world is going to change. You actually need to then work towards it. What is the one thing that you as a man, you as a young boy are willing to do to actually create change? And as you probably know, in 5 days there was there was one man in every single country in the world who had joined the he for she movement and taken that commitment. There was 1.2 billion conversations within those first 5 days. But for me, what has been really fascinating is what we've done with sort of the top down. We then decided to engage governments, big corporations, universities, to really look at this transformative aspect of gender equality. And we created an initiative called the Impact 10 by 10 by 10, where we have engaged these global leaders to come up with clear commitments that they can deliver by 2020. So it's a 50-50 by 2020 initiative where we want to look at the big issues around equal pay, the gender pay gap, around having women in senior leadership, around having women, ending child marriage if it's at a country level. And they have three sort of criteria. One is you've got to define those clear commitments to be delivered by 2020. Number two, transparency. If you're a corporation, you have to release all your gender parity data So back to what can we learn? Transparency is going to be key to create the change that we want to see. And then number 3 is really sort of the championship of this initiative by the CEO, by the head of state himself, and being able to report annually. So every year during the General Assembly, we report. We have everybody from the CEO of Unilever, Vodafone, Barclays, PricewaterhouseCoopers. We have governments from Canada to Japan to Malawi. And I'll end with a very sort of clear example of what has worked. In Malawi, one of our champions, they made a commitment to end child marriage, which is a huge issue on the African continent. I'm from Zimbabwe myself. I've had family members who have been part of the child marriage custom. And the government then went on, after the president made the commitment, he went on to outlaw child marriage, making it illegal for for anyone to marry a child under the age of 18. But what's been really fascinating for us is to see actually the change come from the community themselves. Change doesn't happen because the government says something ought to happen. Change happens when top-down and bottom-up move at the same time. And in Malawi, there have been these phenomenal leaders, chiefs, male chiefs, that have been trying to, female chiefs that have been trying to end child marriage for a very long time. And it's been very difficult because the men were not engaged. But as part of their he for she commitment, the male chiefs and the female chiefs have been working together. And so far, they've annulled 20,000 child marriages in Malawi, and those girls are now back in school. So, again, it shows that change is possible. The things that we know is we need that male ownership, because we are the usual suspect. If a woman says don't marry a girl, if men aren't saying the same message, the custom will continue to persist. We need transparency, corporations, data. You've got to show your data. You've got to report on your data. And then the final thing, you mentioned this, it's got to start young. There are men in this room who don't understand that it is their role, and Gary, you speak more eloquently to this. The parenting is critical. We have to start young. We can't fix problems later. We actually have to start young. So men with children, uncles, just be part of a good role model and teach.
What is it? Research shows that that when a girl is 4 and 5, she feels that she's equal, just as strong, just as smart, just as capable. But as soon as we get to 6, 7, 8, you start feeling inferior. And then you can start asking, who's in contact with both the boys and the girls at that time? So again, a lot of that points to ourselves, because this is personal. But we can't just blame the school.
That's it.
It's also at home. How do we talk to our girls? And one thing that you touched very briefly on, but that we have not discussed, is also the role of the private sector.
Yes.
Because when we talk about both women's economic empowerment, who is it that's hiring? And it's been wonderful to see really big companies go in and make the change on stereotyping, in marketing. How do you depict a real girl? How do you depict a real man? What is a real man? What is a real woman? Break those stereotypes in both in the whole narrative, but also in the public spaces. So, just calling out, taking off my moderator hat, don't forget the private sector, and I know many of you work in it.
Might I add one quick thing?
You can get it under one of the questions.
Okay.
All right, because now I'm sure somebody will ask about this. Okay. So I'm going to open it up, and please, as Brittany said, wait for the mic, because else we won't record it. So I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then we'll kind of look at who will answer. We'll start there.
Thank you very much, everyone. Really interesting discussion. I'm Georgia. I work for the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship here at the Business School.
Speak up a little bit.
I'm Georgia. I work for the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship here at the Business School. Going on your point about marketing, the Gillette campaign that came out, The Best a Man Can Be, I was just wondering, it's not really a question, it's more of a kind of a discussion point there, because that was mass marketing, but it got a lot of backlash, and mainly from men saying that this was kind of a stab at men, saying that, we don't act like this, why are you telling us we act like this? So I would just be interested to hear what the panellists have to say about that.
Thanks. So up here, yeah.
I'm Ricardo Gorodich from Argentina. We are having a huge movement of feminism there. I present myself as feminist. It was a long way to get here. And I wanted to share, because I will get to my point. I was born and raised against inequality and discrimination. And then I realized that one of the worst inequality was gender inequality. I became a feminist. But what that means to me is that I needed to deconstruct the way I was a man. So that was meaning accepting not to be in power, accepting to lose privileges, accepting not to talk a lot. I'm very talkative. And actually, when I begin to talk, I take my knitting, because I love to knit, and to go against stereotypes. And to wait to women to tell us what's our place. But deconstructing the way of being a man. In Argentina, women are having a huge problem because feminism is split in two. Radicals who say men should stay away, trans women should stay away too, this is our cause, and shut up. Others are inviting us to take a place. But you, women, still don't know what's at place. And women should wait for that, to be clear. And so my question will be, because we work in gender equality in schools, primary schools, I feel the same as you. And we work in workshops playfully and bodily to feel, not only to think, about these kind of stereotypes. And we go for men, for boys, to try to make them live that stereotype away. Do you have any experience about that way of working with boys, not just to take a place, but just to feel and rebuild the way of them being men?
Thank you. And I think there's one, there's a lot of questions. We'll take a couple of rounds. Who was first? Sherry, you got the mic.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sherry Weston with Sesame Workshop, and I mean, this may sound self-serving. I don't mean for it to. I genuinely mean this. But we do a lot of work in gender equity. But obviously, Sesame Street and our local productions around the world are focused on younger children, 0 to 8 at the most. And I love what you said, Katja, when you said it's important to reach young, and that sense that young 4-year-old girls feel totally empowered, and then at 6, 7, 8 may feel less so. What we know is that at 4, even 3, those young girls are also not only forming a sense of self, but of possibilities. And so if you're seeing through children's programming or whatever, role models or a sense of women with different roles and responsibilities, it can affect not only their self-esteem, but their thoughts. But equally importantly, trying to reach young boys who may feel just fine, but it's very important at a young age for them to see that girls can be equals and have various roles and responsibilities. So my question is, for all of you doing this amazing, wonderful work, are there programs you've seen, or what is the youngest age? So much great work in girls' education focuses on adolescence, but I'm curious about how much you see if people are focusing even younger on both boys and girls and feel like that's valuable investment.
Right. We will just look to here. We had the best a man can be, and kind of if it's okay to provoke. Ricardo, on programs where you play to feel, to move, and Sherry a little bit in the same alley, same alley on early childhood, both development but also programs that works. Who want to go for it? Sherry?
Sure, I'll take on the Gillette issue first. I think Gillette is sort of a story of how to be careful of how much we listen to angry men. So in the U.S., be afraid of angry men, but at the same time, let's be careful of how much voice we give them. About 1 million men probably hit dislike when the Gillette ad came out, but a follow-up survey that P&G did found that about 70% of women and men were very favorable to the messages in that ad. And so essentially, I think what we can take from that is a few angry men can do a lot of harm in the world. But I think we've got to figure out ways that, why are the men who liked that ad so silent? And so I think it's dig a little bit behind there and not just let those messages be controlled by the voices of angry men. They're there. This is a threatening conversation. Gillette obviously provoked. It used the word toxic masculinity as a way which most men read as you think all men are bad.
Yeah.
That's why we're using other language to talk about it. But I think just don't let that conversation be hijacked by the angry men. The comment on the kind of participatory group education that you do, that is kind of the centerpiece of what we've done with our Program H materials for hombres and homings in Spanish and Portuguese, Manhood 2.0 we call it. Very inspired by a Paulo Freirean approach of a consciousness raising, being aware of how we're socialized and how it shapes us and puts us in a box. We do an activity that's one of the best, I'd say, that we ask boys and girls, sometimes we'll do these together, of which emotions it's easiest for boys to express, and it's often anger, probably first, and empathy and some other issues may come out last, vulnerability, etc., and sort of use that as a moment to say, in a sense, the question is, how's that manhood going for you? And can we deconstruct it so that the force for change coming from within, as well as we're trying to shift it from without. So, yeah, I think the big question is, how do we do that in every school, everywhere, and then getting to Sherry's question of how do we then take it younger. Most of our stuff has been older age, so kind of 10 and above. But I think there are some good models of parent training and teacher training, because so much of that is what we as adults do to broker and scaffold the space for young children. And the content creation. I mean, with Save the Children, we've done children's books that try to model other stuff, play with all the tropes of, the helpless princess and the male hero who comes at the end. How do we flip those around so even we get young children looking at this? So yeah, keep doing what you guys are doing with amazing puppets and humor. But I do think we as adults can't say you as 3-year-olds have to fix the gender binary. Please, I'm going to say we have to do that. So that would be my main message there.
So I think, So I think to both the two questions here, the important lesson for me is that revolutions are never built on consensus. And we are trying to build a revolution. Unfortunately, it's come to the point where something drastic has to change. I think the Gillette, yes, was sort of controversial, but it created a conversation. And we actually need to create that space for conversation. And another big thing that I mostly hear from guys who are part of the He for She movement is people are looking for thought starters. There's actually quite a large silent majority of men who want to do the right thing, but they're looking for very concrete things to do. So I also think that the Gillette, of course, no ad is going to be perfect, but it did give sort of very clear things. Catcalling, just call out your friend if he's doing that. And I do also sympathize with you around this issue. It's something that we also have to be sort of very careful, I think, in terms of messaging. We never say women need help from men. We never, the language is really, really critical. Women don't need men because women can do it, but women need male engagement because men hold the power. So I think having that framing is really important also for women that are sort of threatened. And He for She was highly controversial because some women said, no, men are the problem. And we still had to say, well, that may be the case, but they also have to be part of the solution. And just one very quick example of what we're doing with young kids. The Boy Scouts is one of our He for She champions. And as part of this partnership, all 50 million Boy Scouts will become the part of the He for She movement by 2020. And we've created a gender curriculum that we've now started implementing across the world. So again, I'm happy to share the materials with you.
Great. Judith, short, then we'll take a couple of extra questions.
Well, two things. I think that the discretionary space will only go so far without appropriately priced externalities. So France has something called civil debt. There has to be much more effort to make fathers pay a fair share of cost for children, period, full stop. Right now, males are free riders in many cases on female caring, and it's going to get worse whether it's a demographic shift, lower fertility, and so forth, unless there are, we have to change the market from that side as well. On age, we have something called the asset exercise. We just did it now in Tanzania, many places, and it asks what's the latest age by which a girl, and you could certainly add a boy, should know certain things. Working in Haiti in the context of horrific sexual violence. With a range of stakeholders, including one 12-year-old girl who happened to be Paul Farmer's daughter. We had ages 8, 10, and so forth. She came and said, no, 6. Just now working with Syrian refugees, by 4, girls need to know the control of space around them, the dangers they run, the possibility of, irretrievable events is very high. So as much as I certainly welcome all of the positive desire, boundaries need to be set. There need to be defined female spaces. They need to begin early. There need to be externality costs properly located. And that will anchor some of the normative change. It will pull it towards it. So it's a yes and part of the conversation, but I would feel absolutely irresponsible not to introduce it.
Great, thank you. Let's take a couple of extra questions. There was up here, the gentleman on the last row.
Hello. Bunker Roy from the Barefoot College. For the last 15 years, we've been training illiterate, rural, middle-aged grandmother women from non-electrified villages around the world and bringing them to the Barefoot College, and in 6 months, through sign language, making them into solar engineers. So since then, we've trained about 3,000 women from 96 countries. And what are the lessons we've learned? First, the Indian Prime Minister called them...
I'll have to ask you to get to the question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
First lesson we learned was that men are untrainable. Men are restless, men are compulsively mobile, and they all want a certificate. And the moment you give a man a certificate in a village in India, he leaves the village within 24 hours looking for a job. So we only train women. Now the only way to bring about equality is to give a woman a skill that the women respect, that the men respect. When we went to the village and asked some of these men would they like to be trained by their grandmothers, they said no. But when the woman goes as a grandmother to India and comes back like a tiger and soul electrifies the whole village, all the men and boys want to be trained by their grandmother.
That's great. Thank you. And the question?
The question is, why don't we train more women from villages in India in a skill that only men respect? Give them training in computers, give them training in solar, give them training in areas where only identified by men.
Thank you.
So a last point. What is the most powerful way of communicating today? Is it telephone? Is it telegraph? Is it television? Is tell a woman.
Thank you. You had marked beforehand?
I don't know, is this working? Yeah? Okay. Hi, so I work with Breakthrough, and we've been working with men and boys for the longest period of time. And it's not that we've just given up on adult men, but we work with a lot of younger boys, so 11 to 18, and we have a curriculum that talks to both boys and girls, 30% boys, 70% girls, and we've seen great changes happening with the boys in terms of significant changes in gender-based behavior and attitudes through an RCT done with JPAL. My question is that how to create much more interesting role models for boys who are happy and equally talking about their problems and girls' problems in society. How do we do that? Because there aren't too many role models available.
Thanks. And this one on the last row up. Yep, that was you. Yes, thank you.
Just a question about how much thought has been given in the field to how to help the boys develop an identity themselves, which is positive and hopeful. And the boys are victims of bullying. They bully each other. They're bullied by adults. The identity of boys needs to be positively developed also.
Thank you. So we have kind of the investment in boys and forming of identity there. A couple of questions around that, and then we have why don't we train more women in India in skills that also kind of has power. Okay, good, around the world that can kind of give that status. Who want to take it first, Judith?
Well, let me go to the technology issue. The work that we do focuses on building health, social, economic, and cognitive assets. Within that, we've begun technology work about 5 years ago, and we have a tool called a technology scan. Technology meaning new ways of doing things, not new things. Technology has become a very narrowed concept. People are thinking cell phones or Lord knows what. So this is, I believe, that's probably a huge argument to be made for using the girl spaces, the girl platforms, for technology innovation, broadly speaking, which filters up. We have girls-controlled cell phone charging stations, well, solar panels, which include cell phone charging, but we also added a very large LED light that went to the school, which then fostered studying, and in that particular village, all the girls went from primary to secondary school that year, and there's a lot more to be said. That, and I don't want to trivialize the difficulty, but technology as one example, the meaning of it, its vertical integration is at this very moment happening because it is not an early introduction, including to young females. Therefore, they'll basically plugged into existing systems, and it's absolutely vital. Among our core assets for girls are their confidence with and competence with protective and productive technology, including keeping alive the variety of technologies that they need, because they have a very different agenda, or females will have a very different agenda than if it's the guy pumping diesel. So I'm with you. It's a huge point of innovation, and the role modeling that goes on, as well as the early nascent control of one of the few emerging parts of local economies, is vital. We have the community sign contracts, the male leaders, the school teachers, and so forth, to say this technology belongs to the girls. I can tell you more about that. But you have to make all the contracts regarding female ownership of property absolutely explicit. You need shark repellents right up front. You need to know who wants it. If you give an asset to a female, figure out who wants it and block them. Just block them as best you can, and then follow it as much as you can. It is, I think, a way of really renewing marginal communities, but using girls as the entry point. There's just as much of the community as anybody else. And I think they'll be there for a longer period of time, to your point. If you analyze who will be there in 10 years, the 10-year-old girl will be there. Others won't be.
Thank you, Judith. Yes?
Yeah, so I'm going to address the issue of role models, which is actually critical. A very quick example, Stony Brook University is one of the he for she champion universities in the US, and they are one of the unis with a masculinity center. They did a study with young boys on college to identify role models, and 90% of the boys, or 95% of the boys, said they did not have a role model. And out of the 5 that said they had a role model, only 3% said it was their father. 2% said it was Barack Obama. So again, this tells us something, right? That, while we are pushing for girls, I think we should also not forget that in some cases, boys are being left behind. They have no sense of identity. They don't know who they are. And at the moment, I thought, it's just maybe a very specific thing that happened at this campus. I happened to be in Finland, where the president is also a he for she champion, and I went to two homes. So they have a girls' home, which is young girls who have been off the streets, who have been trafficked. And as part of the healing process, they have these empowerment walls where they are encouraged to put people that inspire them. And I went to the girls' room, and the wall was completely full. You had everyone from Malala to Maya Angelou to Hillary Clinton, etc. And I went to see the boys' room, and the wall was completely empty. And it'd been that way for a year. And I spoke to the guys. I said, what's going on? Don't you have a role model? And one little boy put up his hand after major silence and said, well, at some point I thought it was David Beckham, but then I just thought, well, he doesn't really represent me. And there's almost a crisis. They are looking for people to look, for men to look up to. So again, men in this room, that's one thing you can be, if nothing at all, just be a good role model.
Okay.
Did some interviews years ago when we were setting up Promundo, asking young men about who their role models were, and both in low-income urban areas in Brazil and also in Chicago in the U.S. Lots of young men said their mothers. Yeah. And I think if we go down a binary way, we can say, boys need strapping men who serve as their role models to find a healthy masculinity. Actually, we come up with better, healthy identities as men and women if we adopt traits from both genders as we've traditionally conceived it. So I think we've got to be really careful in our programming that we never try to create these self-fulfilling prophecies that men will never ... contribute to the household. Men will never sit still for training. I think we've got to trouble ourselves to say what will encourage that man to sit there for training and what things will disrupt that. What will convince a man that he doesn't, it's not that I'll fine you and put you in prison, which we do really well with low-income men in lots of parts of the world, for not paying child support. So I think we've got to figure out ways that we incentivize you to do the good things, to be present at a prenatal visit, to come to a parent training program. And I'll trouble us a little bit to say, if you're not getting men in the door for that, we probably haven't asked enough questions of what it is that motivates men. Because we're not born into the world with an XY chromosome that says we're incapable of caring. This is socialized into us. So I think I really get nervous when we say men are ... and we don't create the space that says men are drawn like this into the world. That is not taking away our agency for the harm that we cause. But I think disrupting this binary to say boys can learn amazing things from women and girls. 80,000 interviews, 40-plus countries that we've done as part of the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. 2 things that consistently predict women's more empowered views and what predicts men's more gender equitable views. Involved caregiving fathers or male figures in the household and empowered mothers who are working in the workplace. So I think both of those disrupt the binary. I think we need to have a vision that says men, we can disrupt the binary. We have to be careful that we don't create these kind of reinforced boxes in our really good intentions.
So one of the things that's really being discussed now, and it was in Davos at the World Economic Forum. I had a conversation with 13 male business leaders 2 weeks ago. It's parental leave, and not just a week, and not just a couple of days, but a profound time where mom is not home. So, but really where because that is where the bond is made, that is where norms, harmful, what do you call it? You call them harmful?
Harmful, the man box.
Yes, exactly. Norms are broken or kind of broken in. So that's kind of, if we look at solutions, and that's also where I see that's both a governmental, but it's also a private sector, and it's a personal, and it touches on so many areas of lives. Of course, when we talk about parental leave, we also have a little bit of a north, south, east, west discussion, because for many places this is luxury to have it at all. But we could continue this for a long time. But time does fly when you're having fun. So I'm going to ask each of you for a tweetable message
140.
on how to engage, a tweetable message on what to go home and do. What to go home and do. Ducky, you start. I know you're a social media guy.
Okay, so I'll try to limit it to 140 characters.
Oh no, they've enhanced it on Twitter, so you can go a little longer.
I would say, don't be afraid as men to talk about equality. And if you really work on equality, if you truly believe on equality, come forward and identify yourself as a feminist. It doesn't make you less of a man.
Linda?
So my tweetable moment would be gender equality requires all of us. And so go to hevorShe.org and make your commitment. If I can just add something, which is not the tweetable piece, which is really, I think the important thing here is don't underestimate the power of one. Because sometimes you might think it's just one person, it's just me, what can I do? You can do a lot. I was 8 years old, starving underneath a tree in a small African village. The United Nations found me. They gave me a bowl of warm porridge and saved my life. I decided at that moment, after I knew it was the United Nations, that that's what I wanted to do. 15 years later, I've been in the UN system, and I was part of creating something. So, if you think that you can't create change, I can guarantee you that you can. And if you still doubt me, I leave it with a very powerful African quote that says, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending a night in a room with a mosquito.
Thanks. Judith?
I took you seriously. I've never tweeted, but I have one.
That's good.
Disrupt planned poverty, the exclusive responsibility of females for the time and fiscal costs of children, and replace it with shared planned parenthood.
Thank you. Gary?
Gender equality needs men, and men, we desperately need gender equality.
Yay! And I'll try one. It's gender equality is everybody's business, can't be business as usual, and it happens now. Hashtag SkollWF. Yay! So thanks a lot. And thanks to our panelists. I'm just going to wrap up. You have another couple of minutes. I'm going to keep your attention. And I don't know about you, but we can't let the conversation stop here. We have failed blatantly if we walk out this door and nothing happens. If we have not instilled at least some ideas to what each and every one of us in our own lives can do differently, but also use the power we have. Because we all have power. For some it's appointed, for some it's taken, for some it's, but we all have small, big, soft, hard. But we need to walk out of this room and then think about what can I do. This is the investment in gender equality. It always goes up because we're not going down. And it points to yourself first, because that's where the change starts. We will continue the conversation in the hallways here. We will also continue it in the Women Deliver conference that's coming up in 48 days. It's 7,000 people on site discussing gender equality and looking at solutions, and more than 100,000 in satellite events across the globe. My encouragement to you, if you can't be in Vancouver, Canada, is that you engage in that global dialogue, either by taking the conversation about gender equality in your own space, whether it's at home, in your sports club, at work, or wherever you are, and have that discussion about what can each and every one of us do, because that's the way we will make change happen. Thanks a lot.